All right. Today I'm excited because in our church for the last month we've been wrestling with some big questions that people often ask about the faith. And today might be the most common question I've heard over the years. I was a young adult pastor for many years, and many times the questions folks would ask revolved around this very question today. But I want to start by asking you to think about 1997. Now, True North is a younger church than Highway, so some of you might have not been born yet, which is very embarrassing for me. But 1997, I want you to remember that year for a second. Where were you? What were you doing? What was your hairstyle back then? I actually have a couple of pictures I brought. 1997. So this picture right here on the left, that's me in the very middle. And you can tell how cool I am because I've got my shirt tucked in and my pants are pleated. That's how you know my mom loved me. I thought it was interesting. My mom did send me this picture yesterday. The guy, can you see the guy on the very, very left? Like just 5 years ago, we would have made fun of that, the way he was dressing. And I would have been like, man, that's so silly how we used to dress. And now, no joke, I saw some of you walk in with those exact same pants. And I told my kids this morning, I'm like, I wish I would have kept my pants. You would have thought I was so cool. The second one is just a funny picture of me playing Game Boy, very annoyed at my mom. 1997, I remember watching a strange story on the news. It was a religious group called Heaven's Gate. You might remember them. They had gathered near San Diego, and 39 of them would end up saying goodbye to this world together. And some of them actually recorded via video their goodbye. And I actually just want to show you a couple of these.
I just want to say how thankful I am to Doe and T for helping me and taking me under their wing.
My thoughts in these last hours are only of joy and wonder at the thought of going home.
Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? Since I've been in the class, I've learned the answers to all of those.
And couldn't be happier about what we're about to do.
The thing you should know is these people praise Doe and thank him for showing them the way. On the other side of the camera, Doe, there.
I just want to...
So if you notice, one of these men asked this question. He said, what is the meaning of life? And I've found the answers through this class. 39 people followed two leaders. One of them, you saw his crazy face. Doe and T were their names. One of them was a son of a pastor. So you got to watch out for those pastor kids, Jay. We got to watch out for them. But for years, these leaders taught them about this grand plan of being eventually swept up by a UFO, but that plan never happened. So then they came up with a new plan that when a comet drew near in 1997, they all collectively took their lives, believing this was the path to becoming immortal extraterrestrial beings. Now, I have sort of a deep interest in cults like Heaven's Gates because even though they are tragic, like cults give answers to deep human needs. One of the primary needs that this man expressed in the video is this need for meaning, for purpose, this hope that life is not random, but there's a plan. And so cults might sound crazy to us, but they provide people with comfort and certainty because they say, yes, there is a detailed plan. And so I have empathy for these people because I know they're just like us. They long for clarity. So when I was a young adult pastor, I'd grab lunch and coffee with folks. And do you know what the number one question they had for me? Can you help me find a date? Was number one. But number two was, does God have a plan for my life? Now, they might not say those exact those words, but they would ask about what is the right job or career, or should I stay in the Bay Area and pay $3 million for a studio apartment, or should I move? Is there a spouse out there for me? What should I do with my life? What does God want from me? All questions revolving around this bigger question, is there a plan? Is everything just random? And of course, it's not just young adults, it's all of us. A big dilemma for all of us, because some of us, we look at our job and it doesn't really satisfy, or maybe we can't stand our boss, or it's tedious, and we can't help but wonder, like, is this it? Really? Is this the plan? Or some of us have hoped for or assumed that we would have a perfect spouse and relationship, but we've tried every dating app possible and no luck. And we wonder, is this the plan? Or we did meet someone, but that relationship didn't work out, and it feels like the plan fell apart. Or we look at the latest natural disaster in the world, and we can't imagine, like, why would that be a part of the plan? Or some of us have experienced a long season where everything did go according to plan until it didn't. And a loved one got sick and died. Or you couldn't get pregnant. Or you got laid off. And so all these situations and so many more, they cause us to wonder, like, really? Really? And that's the big question today. Does God really have a plan for my life? Because it sure doesn't feel like it at times. Or maybe God's just not good at making plans. Because it's not how I would make it if I were to write it out. So if you've ever wondered about randomness or God's sovereignty or whether or not it's all for a purpose, this sermon is for you today. Now, to wrestle with this question, I want to go through an ancient story that begins with a dream and a plan. Okay, in the very early days of the Israelites, the man Jacob, he has tons of kids, but one is extra special. We see here Jacob, Israel, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. And one of my favorite common jokes that I like to make to parents in front of their kids is I just ask them, like, which one of your kids is your favorite? And then it's really fun for me because I get to see them squirm, but they don't love it so much. But Joseph has a favorite, this special kid, and it really is driving his brothers crazy. But then it gets worse because Joseph has a dream. It seems like a plan for the future. We see this in chapter 37. Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, which made them hate him even more. And he said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. When we were binding stalks of grain in the field, my stalk got up and stood upright, while your stalks gathered around it and bowed down to my stalk." His brothers said to him, "Will you really be our king and rule over us?" So they hated him even more because of the dreams he told them. Then Joseph had another dream, and he described it to his brothers. "I've just dreamed again. This time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." So Joseph has a dream that points to his success and his power, his future achievements. Now for a second, I want you to just put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Like, wouldn't this feel really good? Wouldn't it feel nice to get a dream from God that indicates success and purpose? It must have made him feel seen and special, like God is guiding me. And maybe he's even wondering, like, what's my next step towards success? Maybe it's training or education. But then we see the next step. In verse 18, the brothers saw Joseph in the distance. Before he got close to them, they plotted to kill him. The brothers said to each other, "Here comes the big dreamer. Come on now. Let's kill him, throw him into one of the cisterns. And we'll say a wild animal devoured him. And then we will see what becomes of his dreams." So question for you, do you have any family drama? Do you have any crazy family members? Okay, don't point to anybody if that person is next to you right now. Just give me a little nod, and I'll know that that's your crazy family member, okay? But I'm guessing your crazy family member has never plotted out to kill you. It's one of the craziest pieces of family drama. But I think sometimes the problem with these ancient Bible stories is they're so familiar to us, we sort of lose the edge. So I want us to try to imagine this story again for the first time and do our best not to think to the end of the story, but think about how it would be experienced in the moment. So again, imagine yourself as Joseph, confident, excited. You just received this dream and plan for success. And then literally the next step to the plan is to be betrayed by not one, but 10 of your brothers. Imagine looking them in their faces. You've known them for 17 years, and they're enraged, and they're ready to kill you and make you a slave. This was far from the dream and the plan. But then Joseph was purchased by Pharaoh's chief officer, and Genesis 39:2 says he became a successful man and served in his Egyptian master's household and put everything he had under Joseph's supervision. So then there's another twist in the story, right? His slavery leads to something good, and now maybe Joseph is thinking, here we go. This was the plan. Now I'll climb my way to greater success. But just a few verses later, we see this. His master's wife became attracted to Joseph and said, sleep with me. And he refused. But she keeps pursuing him, and he keeps turning down her advances, showing his integrity. So that angers her, and he steals his garment and eventually accuses him of sexual harassment, and his master throws him in jail. Now, if I'm Joseph at this point, I'm just honest with myself, and I don't know the ending of the story, I'm thinking a few things. Like, first, I'm angry at God. Like, I've chosen integrity, and this is what I get. And secondly, I'd be confused and lost. Like, what happened to the plan that you gave me? And then third, I would be tempted to give up. I would assume, like, this is all that there is, and I would forget about any concept of redemption or restoration. But of course, there are more twists to this story. In jail, Joseph begins interpreting dreams miraculously through his connection with God. And so things look to be turning again. And he even tells the chief wine steward, he says, put in a good word for me to Pharaoh so he sets me free from this prison. But nothing happens. The wine steward completely forgets about it. So Joseph is stuck in prison for 2 more years until finally Pharaoh has a dream. The chief wine steward remembers Joseph. Joseph interprets a dream, and he's released. So at long last, he rises to a great place of power. Now, before we get to the end of the story, I just want to pause here and just have a moment to reflect on this ancient story and what it can teach us. Like, does God have a plan for Joseph? And again, it's easy for us to say yes because we can see the entire story, but would Joseph had wrestled with this when he was enslaved or in prison? Would people close to him doubt this reality? It's a very human story for all of us today because for us, our story is not over yet. We do not know the ending. We're right in the middle. And it's just natural to wonder, is there any direction or purpose? So I want to use this story to help us wrestle with this question today. So let's start with this. Does God have a plan for your life? Yes. I believe this 100%. I believe God has a plan for your life. Without this reality, we can easily get so washed in a sea of meaninglessness or randomness. And it's really core to the Christian faith, and throughout the Bible, we see evidence that life is not just a random collection of occurrences. So the answer is yes. But then I would also say this. Does God have a plan for your life? Yes, but it's complicated. Yes, but it's complicated. It's not as simple and straightforward as we sometimes make it out to be as Christians. And we can see this through Joseph's life, but also in our own lives. So I want to just break down some of the ways this is more complex than we often realize. The first thing is this. Does God have a plan for my life? Yes. But it's a collaborative plan. It's a collaborative plan, okay? I'm curious, how many of you grew up in a church setting where they used puppets? Anybody? Okay. Are some of you just embarrassed? Okay, great. Well, I'm glad because I brought one today for your viewing pleasure. I found this upstairs, and all this morning when I used it, I couldn't figure out how to actually get my hand in here, and I still can't. So for whatever reason, I don't know the history of this, But at some point, puppets became heavily involved in evangelism with the Christian church. And so I went to VBS as a kid, and they would use puppetry to tell us stories about the Bible. And I don't mean any offense to any people that are passionate about puppet evangelism, but as a kid, it creeped me out so much. They're so creepy. And I was affirmed this morning because my 7-year-old, we were sitting down here in the front row, and I just had the puppet sitting here. And I came in a little late as we were singing. My 7-year-old turned to me. He was like, "That puppet scares me." And I was like, "I know." And he was like, "No." He leaned to me. He's like, "What are you going to do with that after the service?" Indicating like, "You're not going to bring that home, are you?" And I was like, "No, buddy, I'm going to put it back up." But it is creepy. It didn't help. I read a Goosebumps story when I was a kid called Night of the Living Dummy, where a little puppet came to life and wreaked havoc. So it was something about the eyes. There's something dead in the eyes, and they look. He looks real, and he's talking to me as a kid, but I just felt like they were always whispering to me, "I can't wait to see you at night." Right? Can't wait to visit you in your sleep tonight. That's what I felt. Anyways, that's a side story. I wanted to bring a puppet, especially one that's got this little thing right here, because I think this concept of God having a plan for us, it can lead to this kind of thinking where it almost makes God out to be like this divine puppet master, okay? He's got his hands on the strings of our life, and he's moving us around exactly where he wants, and he's orchestrating things exactly how he wants things to go. And this is sort of like one extreme side of a spectrum, where we can assume and believe that God caused my car not to start, or God made me late to work, or it was God that orchestrated it to rain on our Disneyland vacation and have me throw away hundreds of dollars. Thank you, God. And sometimes with this perspective, like very well-meaning people, we can sort of say these flippant phrases as Christians where we can say everything happens for a reason to someone who's hurting. Or we can say he doesn't give you more than you can handle. Or when someone's died, we can say, well, maybe God just needed another angel. Or we can say this is all just a part of his plan. And in these painful moments of life, like death or cancer or divorce or major mistakes, it's like, really? It ends up being more harmful than helpful, because in times of need, the last thing I need to be told is that it's not a big deal because God has a plan. Just trust him. And of course, yes, it can be comforting to just trust that everything is under God's control. But is that how you experience life? I don't know about you. I've made some poor decisions in my life that have had real consequences. And I'd love to blame them on God or even the devil, but it sure seemed like me. Other people have hurt me or dismissed me, and that sure seemed like them. So it's this concept of like free will, right? We see this in Joseph's story. It's very human. His brothers are jealous and angry and vengeful, and it's they who make the horrific decision to get rid of their own brother. The master's wife is full of lust and thirst and then anger, and she makes a decision to lie. And Joseph, instead of quitting or giving up, he makes the decision to keep going, to keep having integrity. And so humans, God has given us free will and agency. But then what can happen on the other side of the spectrum, I think this is way more common in our world, our secular world today, is this the belief that everything in my life is up to me. It's sort of the opposite of being a puppet, like I'm in charge of my plan, my actions, my direction. There's this famous poem called Invictus, and it sort of sums it up best. It says, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. But is that true of life either? I don't know about you, but I didn't create myself. I didn't give myself breath. I didn't choose to be born where I was born. I didn't choose to be a Chicago Cubs fan. God ordained me from the beginning of time to cheer for God's favorite team. Uh, like there are a lot of ways that if I look at my life, I've been guided and led and pushed and shaped. It seems so clear to me. I want to give you an example because I'm guessing there's many things in your life that are like this. But it's sort of funny to me that I am a lead pastor of a small church in California. I was born, as Sylvia said, in a town in Oklahoma, and my road here is fascinating. First, my grandfather was a pastor, so the seeds were laid at a young age where I saw him writing sermons or praying for people. But as a kid, I was terrified of public speaking, so much so I cried before my first time speaking at school. But then I went on stage and I sort of fell in love with it. I really like it. In high school, I started a punk rock band. Not something that you would think would lead to me being a pastor, but it was through the punk rock band that I joined the worship team. And then I got to know my youth pastor, and my youth pastor inspired me this reality that I could actually be a full-time minister, that God might be calling me to that. In college, I was fired by a church on Christmas Eve, and I'm not bitter. I've gotten over it. But actually, getting fired was an amazing thing because it led me to a church in Chicago, which ended up being connected to a church in Menlo Park, California. And they wanted to interview me, but it didn't work out, and we moved somewhere else. But then 2 years later, they called again, and it did work out. And then later, I went from worship leading to young adult pastoring, and I started feeling this sense of maybe I could lead like a small congregation, but then COVID hit. And I started looking for churches all over, and I never even heard of Highway, but my buddy was also looking for lead pastor jobs, and he found it. He didn't think it was for him, and he passed it along to me. And then in the interview process, the consultant who helped with the process happened to be a former mentor of mine. And Highway happened to be like a mile away from my house. And then when I finally met with the interview team, it just felt so perfect. Like God had been preparing me for a job like this. Now, the only reason I say all that, not that you really care about all the details, but when I look back with perspective, I just sense God's leading, God's shaping, God's decisions, God guiding. And I'm guessing there are things in your life, when you look back with perspective, you see little nudges, open doors, closed doors, meeting someone just at the right moment. When you look back, you're like, man, how did I get here? And it's hard not to see God. So I love this concept of a collaborative plan because it's not either this or that. It's both and. It's collaborative. And we can see this word. It's so beautiful. In the middle of Joseph's story, it's a word of collaboration. If you'll humor me, would you just say this out loud? I got the scriptures coming up. Can you say the bolded words with me? Here we go. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made everything he did successful. While he was in jail, the Lord was with Joseph and remained loyal to him. You guys are losing energy. One big one, one left. The jail's commander paid no attention to anything under Joseph's supervision because the Lord was with him and made everything he did successful. Isn't this so beautiful and powerful? I never really paid attention to this, but we just see right in the middle of the story, the Lord was with him. I love this because withness is a posture of friendship and intimacy. Not a God off in the distance moving us around like puppets, but also not like a rugged, self-sustaining, independent human who's just off there on their own, but a friendship, a collaboration and intimacy. Yes, God has a plan, but it's meant to be based in relationship, mutual love and trust, free will and guidance, walking a path together, listening and responding. So a couple of questions for you to just reflect with God for a second. First one is this. Where in your life right now are you tempted to just call it fate? Guess this is just how it was supposed to go instead of owning the choice that's sitting right in front of you. Another question to think about. If God's not a puppet master and you're not a self-made captain of your soul, what would it actually feel like day to day to walk with someone, listening and responding and moving with? What would that look like in your real life? Yeah, yes, God has a plan, but it's a collaborative plan. Second thing we can learn from the stories, does God have a plan for my life? Yes, but it's not centered on you. It's not centered on you. One of my favorite things to pay attention to is at the end of sports games. I love those post-game interviews because they're so cringy oftentimes. And I don't mean to make fun of them, but someone will finally win, and then they'll say something like, man, we went through a lot of adversity this season. And then they'll say, but God tested our faith and brought us through. Or they'll say some variation of this. And it's cringy to me because the assumption seems to be that God was orchestrating this athletic endeavor and wanted this person to hoist the trophy, and they're the chosen one. But God must have wanted other teams to lose, I guess. And sometimes this can bleed into our underlying assumptions for us when we talk about a plan for our life. It's built around our modern, Western, American individualistic plan that is centered on my success. When we talk about a plan, often we are talking about what amazing job will I have? What amazing, perfect spouse will I find? Will I have 2.5 perfect kids? A perfect house to buy? Successes that show how prosperous I am. That's often what we think of when we think of a plan. At the beginning of Joseph's story, it does sort of seem like that, doesn't it? A dream of power and ruling. It's like the age-old human longing for success and power. But at the end of the story, there's this beautiful twist because the plan does come to fruition, but Joseph's position wasn't about individual success, but it was about glorifying his God and helping others. Listen to how Joseph gives God the glory here. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, but no one could interpret it. And then I heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, it's not me. It's not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable response. And then Joseph predicts a famine to come. And for 7 years, he has this amazing strategy to store up food to help. And when the famine finally comes, many lives are saved and protected because of Joseph's foresight and leadership, including, of course, his entire family and the Israelite tribe. And so his brothers come to him for food, and Joseph finally reveals himself. And of course, they are terrified, assuming he will want revenge. But instead, Joseph says this. Joseph says, don't be upset. Don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me here. Actually, God sent me before you to save lives. We've already had 2 years of famine in the land. There's 5 years left without planting or harvesting. God sent me before you to make sure you'd survive and to rescue your lives in this amazing way. And so it's this subtle shift from the initial dream, which almost seemed to have like an arrogance about it, like ruling over his brothers. But now there's a clarity. The plan wasn't to rule. The plan was to save lives, to help others. Years after this, the same Israelite tribes, they're wandering the desert and they're looking for a plan and leadership. And so God gives them the gift of the law, which was sort of like a massive set of rules and guidance, like a way to understand God's plan for his chosen people. But there's so many laws, it can be confusing. So many years later, Jesus simplifies the entire plan, the entire concept, the entire structure down to this essence. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with with all your being, all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. Does God have a plan for your life? Yes. But maybe it's less about your job or what city you live in, how much money you make, and more about who are you becoming. The plan is for you to love God more deeply and to love and serve others more wholly. I think the problem with this big question is often we ask it from a self-centered viewpoint. Like, what about me? What's the plan for me? I'm curious, what shifts would you make this week if you ask God, not what do I get, what can you tell me about my plan, but instead you ask the question, who does this serve? Who are you calling me to love? Now, final thing here, and I'll make it quick, but the answer is yes. God does have a plan, yes, but it's an unexpected plan. It's probably what I love most about the story of Joseph. It's so unexpected. Twists and turns and betrayal and redemption and drama and dreams. And that's the one thing I can say confidently today to all of us. Whatever plan we hope for or think we might have, it will not come the way we expect it. God's ways are mysterious and unknown to us. And I think this is why with all these kinds of questions, it will always come back to this one word, trust. Trust. Trusting that there is a God and I am not him. And there's nothing wrong with asking God for things. This is a great thing to do. There's nothing wrong with hoping and dreaming, also great. But a major part of the Christian journey is learning to hold those hopes and dreams loosely, being willing to release them. And Jesus taught his disciples to pray in this way. He says, your kingdom come, your will, your plan be done. Because we all have a will and we all have dreams and hopes. But our journey towards God is learning to release. Not my expectation, but yours. And of course, we see this modeled by Jesus himself. There was a plan for an Israelite Messiah. It had been laid out for thousands of years. The plan was for a king with power to come and conquer other kingdoms, restoring Israel to earthly strength. But instead, the actual plan was not what anyone expected at all. This king, just like Joseph, came to save people, but not through earthly and powerful ruling, but through sacrificial love, forgiveness. So we see Jesus, fully human, kneeling in the garden. He's wrestling with this final step of the plan, brutal death on the cross. And what do we see Jesus say? Father, if it's your will, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done. It's a prayer of trust in God's plan. Now back to 1997, those 39 people waiting for a comet and a spaceship. And I think what got them there was not stupidity, but it was longing. They wanted a plan so certain they would do anything to get it. That's how bad we want to know we're not random. But look at what the actual plan from God looks like from Joseph's life. Not a set of predictable, engineered outcomes, but 20 years of betrayal, slavery, of false accusation, of forgotten promise, and silence. And right there in the middle of it all, just this. The Lord was with him. With him. Not controlling every detail, but with him in every detail. Let's pray together.